In December of 1872, more than 200 Yavapai Indians were camped in a cave above the Salt River Canyon in the Arizona Territory. Earlier that year, a general order proclaimed all Native Americans in the Arizona Territory who were not on reservations were to be considered hostile. Soldiers from nearby Fort McDowell were sent to round up the remaining Yavapai. They searched the area for weeks, looking for their camp.
The Yavapai were on the run literally for their lives. The chief told the boy to go out and seek out that other group, the Yavapais, that was close. He was captured and he was forced to reveal the location of the cave. When they surrounded the cave, they just fired into the cave. The U.S. Army account saying there's a battle, but it really wasn't a battle. What we refer to as a massacre, it gives present Yavapai a foundation that their contribution will always be remembered.
After the Skeleton Cave Massacre, the Yavapai dwindled to the brink of extinction. But one Yavapai managed to escape this world of violence and bloodshed. His name was Carlos Montezuma.
We are here because of him. Our land is still here.
Carlos Montezuma was instrumental in saving the Yavapai land.
You can look at that education he received as a kind of weapon in defense of his people.
At the University of Illinois, he learned how to fight injustice.
Carlos Montezuma wanted to level the playing field.
Montezuma believed that Indians could accomplish anything.
He was a hero to his tribe when they needed a hero the most.
Carlos Montezuma. We know him as Wasatch.
In January of 1900, a train traveled through the Southwest. On board were the Carlisle Indians, a football team whose players really were Native Americans. They were on a barnstorming tour across the country, beating the top college teams of the day. With their short hair, athletic builds, and Western clothing, to some, they represented the future of their race.
The prowess and ability on the gridiron is amazing. They are competitive against any football team in the United States. They were really the beginning of what we see even in the NFL as a showmanship as part of sport. As they were paraded around the United States, they were an anomaly.
A remarkable group of people who completely rejected the expectations that other people had of them.
The team's role model was their charismatic doctor, Carlos Montezuma. Montezuma was a Yavapai Indian who was born in the Arizona Territory, but he had not returned in 30 years. When Montezuma's train stopped, he looked out at the Verde River Valley and the Four Peaks, and he remembered the family he had lost.
He hoped that he would be able to develop those relations. He was very excited to see family and to have the position of making those connections.
After graduating from the University of Illinois in 1884, Montezuma was one of the first Native Americans to earn a medical degree. He enthusiastically believed in assimilation for Native Americans.
He wanted the American Indian to leave the blanket and come into society. He was proud to be an American Indian, but that was an identity, not necessarily a way of life.
Montezuma saw the sun on the mountains and was struck by the desert beauty. He knew that this beautiful place was also the scene of great suffering. When Montezuma returned to Arizona, his cousin Mike Burns told him about the massacre at Skeleton Cave. Burns was the young boy who led the soldiers to the Yavapai camp and then watched in horror as his family was killed. Burns took Montezuma to the cave. There were still bloodstains on the walls and bones on the floor. Montezuma broke down at the sight. He shared the pain his cousin felt. When Carlos Montezuma was born in 1866, he was named Wasaja, or beckoning in his native Yavapai language. The Yavapai lived in fear of attack by the military and also rival tribes.
There was a rivalry between my tribe, the Gila River Pima, and the Yavapai. Those historic rivalries were exacerbated once the Americans started settling the area and they started creating competition for scarce resources.
This Yavapai nation has been under attack throughout its history.
In October of 1871, when Wasaja was 5 years old, his tribe was camped near the Iron Mountains. Pima raiders invaded the camp and captured 13 children, including Wasaja and his 2 sisters.
He's out in the landscape by himself at night, a lot of confusion. The accounts of his life that he talked about at that moment are one where it's concern for his family and separation from mother.
The Pimas took Wasaja to the outpost town of Adamsville. Adamsville was one of many frontier towns that had sprouted up in the midst of the Arizona gold rush. Hundreds of miners were flooding into the Arizona territory in hopes of striking it rich. Along with them came an Italian photographer named Carlo Gentile. In the Adamsville Square, Gentile was struck by the sight of a scared little Indian boy being offered for sale by 2 Pima warriors. Slavery had been abolished 5 years earlier, but it was still a fact of life for Native Americans.
Chances were that if they could not sell the boy, they would have killed him, because they had no way to maintain it, to provide for the boy.
Gentile offered the Pimas all the money he had, 30 silver pieces, in exchange for the boy. When the Pimas walked away from Wasaja, he tried to run after them. He feared for his life being left with this strange-looking white man. One of the Pimas took the money and bought a new coat. Then Gentile took his photo.
Gentile, with his thick Italian accent, must have heightened that confusion of who is this man and why is he interested in me?
And I can only imagine how the relationship began to grow between Carlo Gentile and little Carlos Montezuma.
Gentile took little Wasaja to Florence, Arizona.
Gentile decided to officially adopt the boy and to have him baptized here in this very church. He decided to give Wasaja his own name, and Montezuma is also a very important figure in the legends of the Southwest.
Carlo Gentile heard 2 Indian girls had recently been bought by a nearby rancher, so he took little Carlos to visit them. When they arrived, Carlos recognized his sisters.
Very moving photograph. You can see the somber expression in these children's faces, and clearly they didn't know yet what was going to happen to them, but they never saw each other again. I can only imagine Gentile on his picture wagon singing Italian songs, and the little Carlos Montezuma may be singing along.
Little Carlos and Gentile set off in a wagon with 150 pounds of photographic equipment.
The 2 traveled to the Grand Canyon. We traveled also eventually to different parts of the Arizona territory to take additional photographs. Carlos Montezuma helped Gentile with his processes when he prepared his plates for photographs.
1860s are sort of an interesting era. There's very, very little documentation photographically of Arizona during this time. People had seen sketches, they'd seen artist renderings, but they'd never seen photographs in this area.
I think what Gentile is really doing is capturing people that he knew this is a unique time period to record. That's what draws Carlos Gentile to this area, and he is literally surrounded by the richness of what he sees. And I think in that sense they are enormously important historical documentation.
Carlos Montezuma's parents survived the raid by the Pima, but they grieved for the loss of their children. They decided to surrender to the military. Carlos's mother heard from other Yavapai that he was still alive. She asked the soldiers if she could go and look for him. They said no, but she decided to leave anyway.
And as she leaves and is breaking the rules that have been placed out for them, she's shot in the back and killed.
After traveling for months, Gentile wanted to head back east to sell his work, so he and little Carlos boarded a train to Chicago. There, Gentile became friends with an Italian ballerina, Josepina Morlacchi. She was performing in a play with the famous Indian scout and showman Buffalo Bill Cody. Cody, like Gentile, knew that people in the East were fascinated with the West. His shows played up the stereotypes of frontier life, such as the heroic cowboy and the Indian savage. In 1872, Cody was preparing to debut the play Scouts of the Prairie, but he was faced with a big problem.
The Indians from Nebraska never showed up, and Gentile said, well, we got a little Indian boy here, let's put him on stage. He was given an artistic name of Azteca, the son of Cochise. Of course, he was not the son of Apache Chief Cochise.
While Carlos performed, Gentile sold photos of the performers. They toured with the company for several months, then they returned to Chicago. For the first time in a long time, Carlos and Gentile settled in one place. It allowed Carlos to make some friends in the neighborhood and to go to school. Carlos enjoyed learning, but Gentile struggled to make a living.
So Gentile did the best he could. Even though he was a very good photographer in it, financially he was always in trouble.
Gentile knew that his itinerant lifestyle was hard on Carlos's education. He asked a Baptist organization for help. The group stated their mission was Christianizing and civilizing the Indians of our country. They found a home for Carlos with Reverend William Stedman of Urbana, Illinois.
The Stedmans were Baptists. The Baptists believed in the transformation of the individual. Now, a lot of that had a religious basis, but it also had to do with the idea of people becoming what they were destined to be and who they were destined to be.
He needed stability, he needed a family, and even Montezuma himself said it was for the best.
The Stedmans' 5 children called him Brother Monty. Reverend Stedman hired tutors to help Montezuma get caught up in his studies. In 1880, Carlos Montezuma was admitted to the University of Illinois at the age of 14. He decided to study chemistry. He already had experience mixing chemicals from helping Gentile process photographs.
I think Montezuma liked being at Illinois. He liked being a student here. He was very good at what he did. He was successful. He was also in a town that he had come to know. It was a small school. It was pretty informal. People made a space for him, even though it was virtually all white.
Most of Carlos's classmates at Illinois had never met a Native American.
Indians had been forcibly removed from Illinois in the early 19th century. They didn't disappear. They were forced away.
Carlos Montezuma is an anomaly. There are no other Native Americans in Urbana, Champaign, and on campus. Everything that people at that time know of Native Americans are really through probably the dime store novel. People become very interested as he tells this larger-than-life story of leaving a traditional life to entering into Western civilization.
Montezuma started writing for the student newspaper, the Illini. In his articles, he urged people to work for the betterment of Indians with the same passion that was given to freeing the slaves. Montezuma joined the Student Debate Club and gave speeches about Indian history before white settlers. He spoke of Indian bravery, defending their land against overwhelming odds.
He's in this real awkward moment of trying to figure out who is he as a Native American. And it really starts setting the stage for his future activism, and he really starts to see that he is an equal amongst the other students.